Okay, so welcome to the very last session of our Beyond Awareness, Action, and Prevention series in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness and Sexual Violence Prevention Months during April and May. If you have missed any of our previous sessions, you can find them on our YouTube page. The link to that will be put in the chat now. And while we just wait for a few more people to come in, feel free to message the hosts or panelists directly with any tech issues or questions. You can introduce yourselves in the chat or just let us know where you're joining from. But we can get started with who we are. So my name is Natalie, and I'm one of the Sexual Violence Prevention Education Coordinators at Amelia Rising. And joining me today are Daniela, who is also a Sexual Violence Prevention Educator, and Trish, and I will let them introduce themselves if they wish.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Trish. I'm from the Sexual Assault Survivor Center, Sarnia. I am a public education coordinator and a counselor here at our agency.
Hi, as Natalie mentioned, I'm the other sexual violence prevention coordinator at Amelia Rising, and I'm so excited to be able to wrap up this seminar series this week with everybody who's joined us.
Awesome. So at Amelia Rising, we offer tools to help people ages 12 and up have healthier and safer relationships. Amelia Rising offers free counseling for people who do not have their consent respected. And if you'd like more information on our services, you can find us on social media or visit our website. And feel free to send us a DM or connect with one of us.
And at Sarnia Sexual Assault Center, we have a lot of services here. We provide prevention and awareness workshops and education around sexual violence, consent, healthy relationships, as well as individual counseling or group counseling for anyone 16 or over who has experienced any form of sexual violence.
Thanks, Trish. So now we are going to do the land acknowledgement. Amelia Rising and North Bay rests on traditional Anishinaabe territory of Nipissing and Doki's First Nations. This territory is covered by the Robinson, Huron, and Upper Canada treaties.
And Sexual Assault Center Sarnia rests on traditional part of ancestral land of the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, and that's collectively referred to as the Anishinaabeg.
And we are putting a website in the chat to invite you to view what traditional lands and treaty you are currently on and what that means for you in the fight against sexual and gender-based violence. And we cannot talk about violence without acknowledging the violence continually committed against the land and Indigenous peoples, especially Indigenous women and girls, through abuses of state power, colonial, rural, and settler violence resulting in intergenerational harm and trauma. And we recognize that these conversations can have negative activators and would like to share a resource that offers free phone and chat counseling available 24/7 for Indigenous folks called Hope for Wellness. And we'll put the link in the chat now for that. And so over the past 9 weeks or so, you have seen this artwork every day or every session by the Land Body Defense. And we just think it's so powerful, especially this quote: "This system is inherently heteropatriarchal as it correlates ownership to power. Slavery, rape, and loss of land are all a result of a culture that has no respect for consent and bodily autonomy as it relates to self-determination and empowerment. So what happens to the land happens to the people." And because this session is on supporting friends and family, it's gotten me thinking a lot about how the land supports us in lots of ways. A lot of ways that people can care for themselves is by getting in nature, getting gardening, planting new life that can grow. And the land helps us every day. It helps us. And so I'm just wondering if a thought for today is to ask ourselves how we can support the land and how we can support Indigenous folks living in Canada. As we move forward. And with that, we can get into workshop goals and agenda.
Awesome, thank you. So our goals for today, when we're talking about supporting family and friends who have gone through sexual violence and trauma, the first goal is we want to understand peer support. So understanding your own role and your own limitations as a peer supporter, hearing a disclosure from someone you know or someone experiencing realization of harm. And then we want to work on how to support ourselves and others. So learning how to best support family and friends during a disclosure or realization of harm using 3 strategies. We'll also learn how to support ourselves during and after these hard conversations, because that's important to make sure that you're not carrying that with you and feeling that vicarious trauma. And we want to navigate resources, and we want to recognize that we're not alone and that there's many resources, whether they're professional counselors, helplines, or any other services out there. So our agenda for today, we are going to go over glossary terms. There's a video that we're going to start with as well. We're going to go over how to believe, listen, and support somebody. We want to talk about what peer support is and what it is not, how to support yourself, and then we are going to end with another grounding activity, because we do know that having these conversations can be a little bit heavy. So we like to end with taking care of yourselves.
So I will get us started with the glossary of terms that we'll use during this presentation, but it's also just good information to know, as you are looking to support others in your life. So we'll review the terms one by one to get the conversation started and ensure we are all on the same page. So the first one is disclosure. And this is intentionally sharing an experience that can be recognized as harmful or traumatic. Someone's disclosure may also be referred to as a declaration versus a story, as using the term story can unintentionally tell a survivor that their experiences were fabricated and not real and just a story, when that is not the case at all. Making a disclosure of harm or stating a declaration of harm can be re-traumatizing. However, everyone's response to trauma is different.
I really like that you added in there about the story, because you hear that a lot, like, tell me your story, here is your story. Like, I really like that that was in there.
Yeah. We, when Kylie was here, she really wanted to make sure that folks thought about that difference between saying, this is someone's story, but actually it's not a story, it's what happened to them. And it's one of those things that maybe folks don't think about. And it's just good information. It's good to keep in mind when you're talking to somebody that you're trying to support.
Absolutely. Alrighty, so next up in the glossary, we have realization. So compared to a disclosure, a realization of harm can occur unintentionally. Reactions can be diverse and sometimes unexpected. Realization happens when someone is maybe not aware that what they're about to discuss or share is bigger than what they may have initially thought. So a realization of harm might sound casual, as a person is just realizing the harm that may have been done. For example, It could be somebody saying, oh yeah, it's just easier to say yes to my partner instead of saying no over and over again. So many of us who have attended these workshops can also experience realizations of harm. We're kind of learning about these different forms of violence that we've kind of covered over these last 9 weeks. So realizations can also be very difficult to go through as a survivor and as a supporter. So in the next couple slides, we'll kind of review some tools to support.
Thanks, Daniela. And I like the difference between realization and disclosure, because as you said, someone might not even realize that what they're about to talk to someone about is a realization of harm. And so it's good to know, because I know that boundaries are important. And so it's someone unintentionally has a realization, then it's good to know that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So now we'll kind of shift into the definition of peer support. So often when people think about peer support, they may think of it as something that only happens with youth, younger folks, as it is kind of introduced maybe in schools. However, peer support is something that can be offered at any age. It's something we often engage in when trying to support our friends, family, and coworkers. We've found that by supporting friends and family through the lens of peer support, it works for both parties, kind of in that situation through like the emotional support and resource navigation. And I'll kind of go over in a couple more slides about what peer support is and what peer support isn't. And I think that when we talk about peer support now, especially as we kind of enter into this era where we're being more cognizant of what's kind of going on in our lives, a lot of workplaces are starting to introduce kind of peer support groups as well. So it's really true that it can happen at any age and in any environment as well.
Yeah, and I think like the value of peer support is being recognized even more now in fields like social work or in certain like initiatives. Like people can have a job as a peer supporter, and that's not really like what the role of folks will be and what we're talking about today. But like you said at the beginning, I think people often think peer support and they think, oh, you know, that's just something for kids or like teenagers or younger folks. But really at any age, people need peers that can sort of help them out and know or for emotional support. So I really love the supporting friends and family through the lens of peer support, because it's so valuable and should not be underestimated.
And next, we want to look at confidentiality. And I know that sometimes we think of confidentiality and we think a professional obligation. However, when someone's confiding in you or making a disclosure or having a realization, it's incredibly important to respect their confidentiality. In basic terms, confidentiality, it's respecting other people's privacy and boundaries. So when a friend comes to you, you shouldn't reveal their personal issues to other people or talk about it behind their back. It's important to let your friend know you're going to keep what they tell you confidential, unless there's a risk of harm to them or others. This definition is sourced from a younger resource. So we would like to expand that confidentiality can also have limitations with duty to report in professional settings. We encourage you to inquire in your own workplace, what is the duty to report policy, if you're unsure about that procedure. Generally speaking, any harm reported by someone under 16 that is either ongoing or if the younger person is still in contact with a perpetrator, it should be brought to the attention of a trusted adult, a professional like a social worker or a counselor, or it should be reported to the Children's Aid Society. When we're talking about young folks supporting young people, we encourage talking to an adult or helpline for further support and guidance. So I know that sounds a little bit confusing. So we're saying respect their boundary and their confidentiality and not talk about this with other people, but you can have a conversation if it's, you know, peer support and they're young folks. You can say, you know, I'd feel more comfortable if we included an adult and have that open dialogue and saying, you know, I think what you're telling me is pretty important to bring in supports and just let them know that there's a lot of resources around and a lot of services that can help.
And next, we're going to talk about distress. So distress is when someone is showing reactions to a difficult experience, such as sadness, anger, worry, or in some other way is upset. And we can say that this person is in distress, and that is a definition from UNICEF's I Support My Friends participant workbook. That workbook was developed for younger folks living in refugee camps to help support their friends because they are going through some very distressing life situations. But I also think that it's important for people of all ages to understand the signs of distress. So distress may be a reaction to a realization of harm or occur after a disclosure. Recognizing the signs of distress and understanding where distress can stem from helps us understand that the other person may need support. So people experience and display stress in a variety of ways, including crying, shaking, sweating, increased heart rate, increased speech, or becoming silent altogether. And this partners well with the definition of trauma that we are about to go over. And so trauma is any stressful event that is prolonged and where that is overwhelming or that is unpredictable. Trauma is subjective to the survivor, and we often talk about big T trauma and small t traumas. This is not to imply, just like with the continuum of harm, this isn't meant to say that some trauma is bigger or smaller than others. It's just that big T traumas can be described as a significant, usually quick, larger event, such as a car accident, whereas small T trauma is something that may appear to be smaller forms of harm on the surface, but can build up over time. So repeated verbal abuse from a parent can be considered a small T trauma. So an example of this could be a parent repeatedly telling a child that they're overreacting and being too emotional. Or whenever a child expresses sadness, that can be a small T trauma that over time affects the child's ability to express emotions and vulnerabilities. So, if small T trauma is sort of, there's no one event that happens. It's just over time, these small things just compound on each other. So we strongly encourage folks to connect with a helpline or a professional to explore personal traumas as our reactions and understanding of trauma differ from person to person. And the definition that we used was adapted from something by Dr. Lori Haskell. She's a trauma-informed researcher, and we highly recommend that she's a resource you should look into if you can ever attend any of her workshops. They are, not to be missed. So next we have a video that elaborates on how to support a friend who has been sexually assaulted through key points of supporting a survivor in a variety of situations. And we can expand more on supporting a friend and family member afterwards, as well as clarify what our responsibilities are and are not as a peer supporter.
One of the biggest things for victim survivors is a fear of not being believed, or that somehow when they tell someone it'll be minimised or dismissed, or that somehow they'll be blamed for what happened. So as a family member or as a friend of somebody who's been sexually assaulted, a simple thing like actually believing what happened to them, taking their story at face value is really, really important. It shows that you are listening, that you're connected, you're not judging them in any way, and you're there to support them.
The first thing was really listening and really hearing what my friend wanted to say. So it was, I guess that initial conversation was a big conversation. So it was very intense and emotional, and I didn't know what else to offer her, and I think just to be there and to listen to her in that first moment of finding out what had happened, was the most important thing I could do.
One of the major misconceptions that people might have about sexual assault is that it's perpetrated by strangers or people not known, but the reality is for the vast majority of victim survivors, the perpetrator is known to them, which means often it's somebody within the family or close family friend.
Family and friends can help sometimes just by simply listening. We don't need to have someone there sitting patting our hands the whole time. We need someone just to listen, to hear what we have to say. You are very, very overwhelmed by just even the fact having to disclose it, having to relive it in many respects, and getting up the courage to disclose it. In my situation, the perpetrator was known to my family and friends, and so when I needed to say something, I was worried that no one would believe me.
It's really important to know that whatever your story and whatever the story of the person that you're supporting, that there is options to have advice and information for you. And if you're feeling distressed or upset about what's happening, and that's really common, that you can access support from a specialist service as well.
I think it was really helpful for me to take on some of that responsibility for finding out what could be done about sexual assault and what help was out there, and to do some research and discover that there actually are specialist services and that they provide support both to people who have experienced a sexual assault but to friends and family. And so I was actually able to access that service and get some guidance and advice.
Sometimes as family and friends we have ideas about what's helpful, and that might be for that person to contact the police, or it might be for them to have no contact with the police. And the most important thing as a person who loves someone who's experienced sexual assault is that you maybe support that person to explore what options are available to them, and that they can make the decision when they're ready and their time about what they would like to do. There are a lot of support services in every state and territory in Australia that you can find online. You could also contact your local health service or speak with your GP and ask for a referral to the nearest service.
It was really important that I kind of didn't rush in with lots of information and solutions, but I could really sense that what my friend needed most was for me to listen and to be her friend, and to be the same friend that I'd always been, and to not see her differently.
They didn't doubt what was going on. It was helpful that when I did say something, it was more that they could, what could they do? I still haven't told them everything, but it was good that after I did speak to them is that I was still their sister, their daughter, and just a friend. And that's what I needed.
One of the key messages for family and friends who are supporting a victim survivor is to know that there must be something special in your relationship for this person to feel like they trust you, and that you can support them with their story. You can still continue to be a family member or a friend, that sexual assault is a part of this person's story, it's not all of their story.
If anything, the experience of being able to navigate such a thing as sexual assault, and being able to be there for your friend and to offer some support and to really hear what that experience was like for them and be there for them, I think it's actually maybe brought us closer together. I don't want to suggest that good things necessarily come out of sexual assault, but that I think when you're there for the people in your life, when terrible things happen, it can actually bring you closer together.
Okay, so if anyone watching had any thoughts like that they liked or didn't like about the video, feel free to put them in the chat. You can also put them in the anonymous Q&A. I know that that video was sort of more targeted towards people living in Australia, but a lot of the things that were said about how to support a friend or a family member, I really liked it. And a lot of the similar solutions that they had for folks living in Australia are similar to here. So one thing that stood out to me is that, one of the people said that they, felt like they needed to like rush in with a lot of solutions, but actually like what they really needed to do was just listen and be there and show their friend that they were supporting them. And so that's what I really liked about the video.
Something I really liked was that it highlighted that the survivor doesn't want to be viewed differently than before. They wanted to maintain that friendship and not have this view of like of being a victim or something like that, because I hear that a lot when I'm counseling too, is people saying like, I feel like I have a sign on me that says I've been assaulted and it's defining them. So I really liked that part of the video.
Yeah, I like that part too.
And I think that it was important too, like that person was like, I'm going to be the same friend to you as well. Like in addition to not just kind of giving that like sympathy look or like kind of treating that person differently. Like it's very important, like as a supporter, that you kind of keep that same friendship dynamic that you had before.
Yeah, and I think they addressed a part about someone may want to go to police and someone may not want to go to police. And I think that's a big part of like the work that we do is supporting folks whether or not they want to report or whether or not they want to go to police, because it's really up to that person to decide next steps.
And I hear so often with clients who were sort of on the fence with going to the police that their supports, their personal supports were so upset for them for what happened that they did kind of push a little bit. The intention wasn't bad, but the impact on the survivor was they're feeling obligated at that point.
And I think that is the perfect lead-in for what we're going to talk about next.
Yeah, so we're just going to kind of sneak in here to what peer support is and what peer support isn't. So when someone we care about is having a hard time or if they're in distress, we often feel protective and we want to fix the situation for them so that they don't feel bad. So that can mean sometimes maybe feeling like, as we reviewed in the video, like jumping into a fix-it mode, which is not recommended for the supporter or the person being supported. Often those who need the support just want to be heard and may not be looking for solutions and jumping in to try and fix it. As we just kind of spoke about, like jumping in to fix it. Like if you propose a solution right away, maybe like that's something that the person who's being supported doesn't need to hear right away. Like they want you to listen kind of first. And by jumping into that fix it mode, it can also make the person that you're supporting feel additionally stressed because they feel like they need to have all the answers right then and there, which they absolutely don't. So that's why it's important to have example or to kind of go over these examples to kind of see what peer support is and what it isn't. So we'll kind of go over these examples from the UNICEF I Support My Friends workbook that Natalie talked about earlier. So we'll say that peer support is noticing when a friend or family member is in distress or needs to talk. It's finding out about their kind of needs, concerns, and asking simple questions, but making sure that we're actively listening. And then also comforting that peer, friend, or family member and helping them kind of feel calm. So whether that be through grounding activities or any other strategies that you may have learned along the way. And then you also want to give practical care and support. So that'll kind of be elaborated on a little bit later when we go through our steps. And also helping connect information when they're ready for it. So don't jump in right away. but that will include you kind of informing yourself about what supports and resources might be in your community and what might be available, but only kind of giving those supports when that person is maybe ready and after that you've kind of gone through the steps. And then also attempting to protect them from further harm, which means breaking the principle of confidentiality if necessary. So that's kind of when we get into that duty to report, especially if it's a minor. And then finally, it's prioritizing your own safety and well-being, which we'll also kind of review a little bit later as the supporter. So we'll kind of wrap it up with what peer support is not. So that's something only adults or professionals can provide. We know earlier that this can be like a youth to youth situation. There's so many different opportunities for peer support, and it's not just strictly between certain age or professions. It is also not asking someone to tell you in detail what's happened to them, especially if that makes them upset to talk about it. And you're not pressing your peers to tell you and give you their disclosure. They will tell you when they're ready and if they're feeling supported enough to do so. And then peer support is not, it's really important that it's not like a professional counseling or therapy from yourself. You're there to believe them and listen. You're not there to maybe give the professional counseling advice that you might think that they need at that time. And then that also kind of goes into like to being a psychologist or trying to fix your friend, because your friend doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be supported in that time. And that's not going into that fixer mode. And then it's also keeping their story secret if they could be in danger. So again, that's if like it's a youth or if it's like an extremely violent situation. And then that's also kind of applies to others. Like if others could be in danger as well, we really want to make sure that that's not a secret. And then also putting yourself at risk as a supporter. That's something that you kind of need to avoid. And that's why we kind of are going to emphasize later some peer support strategies on how to take care of yourself.
I really like that. And especially these days, like I know that I have been guilty of all this stuff on the what peer support is not, especially when I was younger, because I had no idea about anything. But especially these days with all of the like mental health content online, like on Instagram, on TikTok, any social media, like there's a lot of psychological terms that have made it into the mainstream. And so like understanding like the parts that I like about this list is like you're not being a professional counselor. You're not being a psychologist to this person. Like what you really need is to just support and listen, and that is so much better than that. And I think like that is something that took me a long time to unlearn for myself, because I did used to be a person that really did want to fix, because I was feeling really protective of the people in my life. And whether it was a situation, where they were in a bad relationship or, just something else, it was really hard to like get out of being that kind of fix-it person.
It is hard. It's very hard, especially when you see someone hurting, right?
Yeah.
But what stands out to me is like the fixing. If someone's gone through, especially we'll look at sexual assault, they've had their power and control just taken.
Mm-hmm.
So as a peer supporter, to be telling them what to do is kind of taking more control.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is empower the person to be able to make these decisions and tell us, what do you need?
Exactly.
Okay, so we are going to talk about these strategies: believe, listen, and support. Supporting a friend or family member, we know this can be overwhelming, stressful, and difficult for all the reasons we just talked about. Like you could be carrying that trauma, you could want to rescue and fix. But we have 3 key strategies to support a disclosure or a realization of harm that we're going to go over. So the first one is believe. It sounds pretty basic, but our role isn't to judge or anything. They need to be believed. They need to just be, and sometimes going back to that previous conversation we had, sometimes sitting in that silence is difficult for us, especially if you're a person who does want to fix. Like sitting and believing someone and just like body language validating it's more than you can imagine to the other person. So always start by believing, genuinely believing. Oftentimes when a friend or family member is making a disclosure, the perpetrator of harm might be someone mutually known to both of you. In this situation, it's incredibly important to always believe the survivor. They're trusting you with this information and they see you as a person they're comfortable confiding in. So validate with statements like, I believe you. Thank you. Thank you for trusting me to share that. I can't imagine how this must feel for you. It's best to avoid questions like, are you sure that's what happened? I can't believe so-and-so would do that. They're so nice. Or why didn't you leave? Or did you say no at any point? We know these to be victim blaming statements, but we also recognize we've probably all accidentally said a victim blaming statement at some point in our life. These questions imply that the survivor could have stopped the harm from happening. These questions are also casting doubt and make the survivor question the violence and lead them to avoid disclosing in the future. So if you're the original disclosure support and you come back questioning the situation of what happened, then you're going to possibly hinder that person from getting therapy, from moving forward, from actually getting the help they need, and they might just bury it because now they're taking that blame and they're internalizing it even more.
Yeah, I like that you said that believing someone, it seems really like simple and like, oh, of course. But, I think we've seen over the last couple of years that actually like survivors or victims not being believed is a huge theme and huge issue in our society. And it's one of the main reasons people don't come forward. They've made TV shows about it. There's a show called Unbelievable. And so, we think, oh, of course, like believe, it's so easy. But I think what we've seen is that actually it's not easy. People don't find it easy to believe survivors. And that's a honest truth. People don't. People find it really hard.
Especially if they both know the perpetrator too, right?
Yeah. Because to them, like their experience with that person, they just can't reconcile it with like what is being said. We have something in the chat. I watched Unbelievable. Yes, I watched it too. It was very eye-opening. I really, that's definitely a show to watch with care.
Yes.
If you're gonna watch it at all. But it was just so interesting to me how people weren't believed. And so I really think people like to move right past this believe step because they think it's very easy, but I don't know, it just hasn't been for a lot of people. So I think it's really good. I really liked how you emphasized that. And so we're just going to move on to listen. And so during a disclosure of realization or harm, it is best to listen more than speaking, as the person in the video stated. Her friend just wanted to be listened to, just wanted to be heard. And instead of, like asking questions or making suggestions, listening to listen and not to respond with a solution. And this is another thing that I think people are like, oh, of course, like I'm such a good listener. But then when I heard this the first time, listening to listen and not to respond or to have a follow-up question, I really like thought about how often I did listen to respond. And so it's a very important difference. And remember, it's okay to not have an answer. It's okay to not know all the things. It's okay to not have a solution. That's not what they're coming to you for. They're coming to you because they feel safe with you and they think you will believe them, and they want you to hear them. So listening is the thing that you can do. And with peer support, there's nothing to be fixed right away. We're there to listen, to be a peer, and to provide feelings of comfort and safety. And I did just have this question here, like, how do we know we're being listened to? What are some examples? Those are blank. I know it looks like an unfinished presentation, but this is a spot for folks to share like what their ideas are. How do we know when we're being listened to, especially in this day and age with so many distractions? How can you tell that somebody has their focus on you and is really listening? Feel free to share in the chat or in the anonymous Q&A. Eye contact and nodding. Yep. It's a big part of active listening. So one thing that helps me know that somebody is listening to me is that they don't like pick up their phone, or they don't like, this can be different based on like neurodiversity and stuff. So this isn't always the case, but someone not like playing on their phone or like trying to do another task while I'm talking to them is a big way that I know that somebody is listening to me.
Sometimes too, like it's not always necessary, but sometimes people will paraphrase what I'm saying. And then I know, okay, you're actually retaining this and hearing me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so that brings us to support. We can support just by being there, by believing, by listening. Our support can go further if our friend asks for help or asks for next steps. And as a peer supporter, you are able to offer support by way of helping them connect with services such as a crisis helpline, the Sexual Assault Treatment Center at North Bay Regional Health Center. In Sarnia, do you have a similar spot?
Sorry, I was muted. They can contact us at the center here if there's medical needs. There's the Sexual Violence and Domestic Treatment Center at our hospital. We have victim services and we have women's shelter here if there's any intimate partner or domestic violence involved.
Okay, and we also have like victim services, Nipissing District, and our local Nipissing Parry Sound health unit for sexual health options, or Amelia Rising, or Sexual Assault Center of Sarnia for counseling and support. We did have someone say in the chat about how you know someone's listening. I was going to say that asking clarification questions or repeating what was said were parts of active listening, but where do you draw the line of listening to listen instead of to respond? It's a good question. And I think that that is something that has to be kind of done on a case-by-case basis and in the moment, sort of based on what folks need.
I think even when we go up, I think it was when we were talking about believe or something, with listening as well, just be genuine. Like, go with what your instinct's telling you. Are you if you're really listening, I think naturally you'll just kind of give off that vibe, as opposed to being distracted or just being like paraphrasing for the sake of paraphrasing.
Yeah.
Make it as natural of an encounter as you can. Which I know sounds hard because someone's disclosing to you some horrible things that happened to them. So it's hard to be, okay, let's have a natural conversation about this, because you're going to have your own emotion as well. And you're going to probably feel, if you know the perpetrator, you might feel anger or like disgust or disappointment. So you're dealing with your own emotions as you're listening to the person you care about as well.
Mhm. Exactly. And so speaking of having our own emotions when we're listening to people with their disclosures and their realizations, that brings us to how we can support ourselves.
Yeah, so as we have just discussed, supporting yourself is also an incredibly important task. So it's really important to make sure that you don't overdo it. You can't pour from an empty cup, so you have to take care of yourself. So a big part of peer support is ensuring that you're also in a good place to offer that peer support. So this can mean knowing your own boundaries and limitations to peer support. And we can also do something that brings us joy, and we can try and move our bodies through gentle movement. Even just like the last week, we played that meditation video kind of at the end as a grounding exercise. You can find a quick video like that. And there are some ones that include kind of movement, whether that be from a seated or a standing position. And it's also really important to utilize resources and supports for ourselves. We can also ensure to spend time in our communities, know who you can seek support from within your community, whether that be a caregiver, a role model, a friend, or another community leader. And then also utilizing those supports that we mentioned earlier as well, in both our district and the Sarnia-Lambton area as well. So to be able to kind of offer the support safely to others, we need to be aware of our own negative activators as well, and ensuring that we have safe coping strategies for ourselves. So just example of kind of a safe coping strategy or a resource that we have specifically at Amelia Rising, we have a pre-counseling drop-in session called Rooted, where there's a bunch of different focuses from healthy relationships, taking care of yourself, and also taking care of those around you. And if you're kind of interested in doing more work in supporting yourself, these are really great sessions to potentially consider. And I'm not sure if maybe Trish, you kind of offer some similar services there as well that you might want to.
A little bit. So we do have a group for anyone who's supporting survivors, and that's a facilitated atmosphere. But we also do individual counseling for supports, just because we know that need is there, and we know it's hard to carry that vicarious trauma. So we probably wouldn't have long-term counseling for a support, but a few sessions to really give them some tools and let them debrief what they're feeling and hearing too.
Sorry, I was muted. At Amelia Rising, we also offer like support and counseling for people who are supporting a survivor. Just because you're right, like it can be challenging, and especially if folks, don't know what to do. And also another sort of like self-care thing that we've started at the center recently, for clients of ours is an expressive arts group. So folks, like there's a lot of research that shows that doing art is a great way to help regulate like the nervous system. And so doing something like that, like I recently saw online someone that like hammers flowers onto a piece of paper, and the natural like color from the flowers like goes like onto the paper and like makes this cool little art. And I feel like the physical action of hammering plus like the creative aspect of it is really a good way to sort of like work out any sort of like frustrations, but also be creative at the same time. It's something I'm looking into doing.
I love that. That sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah. And so it's sort of, it's a little nerdy and not quite like on the topic that we're discussing, but I recently took like a course on supporting like adult like survivors of sexual violence, and they talked a lot about how like doing something physical while also doing something creative. So for example, painting on an easel, like walking around, like it bilaterally stimulates the brain, and like soothes the nervous system. And so I thought it was really interesting how like movement like that plus art can actually be a really good way to calm the nervous system. So when we're talking about like supporting ourselves, incorporating strategies like that can also be really helpful. But now we can move on to the summary. So just to recap, we can be a good peer supporter by offering our friends, peers, and family members support when they need it. It begins with believing and listening. It's important to engage in, but it's also limited because of duty to report and our own self-care and boundaries. It's peer support can be difficult, so remember to seek support for yourself, and it does not need to be navigated alone. So we are going to move on to our sort of test your knowledge quiz. You can scan this QR code or go to slido.com and put in this code here. Danielle also put a link in the chat, which will take you directly there. And it just sort of goes over what we have been discussing this whole session. You don't have to put your name in. You can just put like your favorite color or like just your initials or something. Let's start the poll. We'll just give folks more seconds. To join. If you have any trouble connecting or need any help, we can talk through that. Okay, so let's get started. So for the first question, which of the following is a step, the believe aspect of the support process? Is it validate, avoid question? Oh, we have people, they said all of the above, and that is the correct answer. Next question, how can you support yourself? Recognizing your limits, doing something that brings you joy, utilize resources or external supports, and know and maintain your boundaries, or all of the above. And folks said all of the above, and that is the correct answer. So which of the following is not an example of peer support? So is it noticing when a friend or family member is in distress and needs to talk? Asking someone to tell you in detail what has happened when it makes them upset? Comforting the peer, friend, family member, and helping them feel calm and grounded? Or prioritizing your safety and well-being? And folks said asking someone to tell you in detail what has happened when it makes them upset. And that is the correct answer, as we went over before. Peer support isn't like making your friend or family member tell you, there's like forcing them to tell you their story. So true or false, distress is when someone is showing reactions to a difficult experience such as sadness, anger, worry, or in some other way is upset. And folks said that is true, and that is also 100% correct. And for question 5, which of the following was not included in the glossary reviewed today? Confidentiality, trauma, distress, direct, disclosure. Oh, it looks like we have some mixed reviews. So someone said trauma, another person said direct, but we did go over trauma. We did not go over direct as a glossary term, but it's interesting to see. So direct was the correct answer. We did not cover that. True or false? A disclosure is when someone shares an experience that can be recognized as harmful or traumatic. It looks like folks said true, and that would be correct. So awesome. Thank you everyone who participated. We just like to do those just as like a fun way to recap if folks were engaging. And so that brings us to our grounding activity. This is a pretty popular grounding activity, and it's one I personally like and sometimes use myself. So it's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And I can take us through it for 1 second. So try to get comfortable. You're in a chair, and make sure your feet are on the ground, and comfy, or maybe you're able to lay back. Whatever makes you comfortable. You can keep your eyes open or closed, or maybe keep them open for this first one. And just see 5 things in your space that you can see. You don't have to put them in the chat, although if you see something pretty interesting, you can feel free to share. And the next thing, you can close your eyes for 4 things you can touch. They can be really small, simple. Now I have my desk, there's my keyboard, I have some paper that's here, my water bottle. And then just really easily you can try to pick out 3 things that you can hear. So for me, I can hear my laptop fan. I can hear some people laughing in the hallway. And there's some people moving some things around in the office that is next to us. And 2 things you can smell. There's not a lot of things I can smell in my vicinity. Trish, do you have something you can smell?
I do. I have a candle that I don't burn, but I keep the lid off and it smells like strawberry. And I can smell my coffee.
And one thing that you can taste. So usually I can just taste the inside of my mouth. But if you have a coffee or just water even, sometimes things that smell can also, it's like they smell in such a way that it feels like you can also taste them. And just when you're ready, when you feel like you've done all those things, you can open your eyes. Feel free to come back to this space. And so this brings us to the end. Thank you, everyone that has joined us for this series. It's been really fun. I so much appreciate those that have followed along, and joined, or watched the recordings, and filled out any surveys and stuff. You can feel free to scan the QR code for your survey so you can get your certificate. But our contact information and our survey link has also been put in the chat. And you can also watch the recordings on YouTube. Trish, did you have any final thoughts?
I just want to thank all the participants for following this series or hopping on for individual ones. And definitely thank you to Amelia Rising for having me to be part of this series. It's been fantastic and I've loved this experience.
We have really loved having you on. And thank you so much for making yourself available at the last second for me while we were in transition here at Amelia Rising.
Awesome.
And if anybody would like the slides so that they can get the links, because we make all of the slides clickable, you can feel free to email me. I will be able to send you the slides then as well. Daniela, did you have any final thoughts?
Nothing really. I got to kind of experience the last half of this Beyond Awareness, Action and Prevention seminar, and I'm so excited to see how it kind of came full circle during this transition. And of course, just like a really big thank you to Trish and Erica, who's not with us today, for being able to kind of step up and help Natalie in the transition. And I'm really glad that we kind of made this connection and that hopefully we'll be able to continue to work on things together in the future.
Awesome. So if that is it and nobody has any questions or anything, then we can tell all of you to have a really great day. We are just going to put on some music and we'll be here if anyone does want to ask any questions. Thank you for attending.